and welcome to Beginnings, a series of interviews focused on the birth of Playback Theatre in Australia and New Zealand. I'm Michael Pooley, and this is the full interview with Bridget Brandon, who, as you'll hear, was instrumental in the development and spread of Playback Theatre in this region 40 years ago. This was a special interview for me because I studied under Bridget at the Drama Action Centre in 1985. That was a wonderful experience, and it was there that I was introduced to Playback Theatre, which has played such a big part in my life ever since. It took a little time to get my interview with Bridget organised, but I met with her at her home in Sydney on the 13th of June 2019. So thank you, Bridget. We've got here finally.
I know, it's good. Your persistence has really paid off.
Oh, no, thank you for hanging in there. Perhaps if you just introduce yourself, a little sketch of your involvement in early days of Playback.
I'm Bridget Brandon, and along with Francis Batten, I'd say that we were the founding members of Playback Theatre in Sydney, Australia. And that journey actually began in New Zealand. In about 1976, we were living in Martinborough, New Zealand, with a theatre group called Theatre Action. And we were closely associated with this, on this property with this guy called Alistair Taylor, who was quite a very colourful personality and publisher in New Zealand.
Right.
And his partner was part of the Theatre Action group. And one day I remember him calling me into his big office in this big old house that they lived in, saying, "Hey, you might be interested in this. There's this guy in New York. He's doing something called Playback Theatre." I sort of shrugged my shoulders at that thing and said, "Oh yeah, that sounds interesting," not having really a clue. I can't remember how much more I asked of it, or of him, of the system, or what it was about. But soon after that, we actually then moved to Perth, and that's where we started studying psychodrama. I don't know how much people realise this, but Jonathan Fox had done the psychodrama training in America, and he was sort of interested in how to make more theatre of the fact that in psychodrama people are telling their story. So Francis and I went to Perth, and then we came to Sydney after 2.5 years in Perth and set up Drama Action.
So just reflect a little on Drama Action and what you were doing in setting that up. What was the core of Drama Action that you were establishing?
Well, that's a good question. When we were performing in New Zealand, we used to sort of make ends meet by running workshops, and we realised that there was a hunger for the work. We were running clown workshops and neutral mouth workshops. And so then when we came to live in Perth, we were touring around Australia in between semesters, earning our livelihood by running workshops, clown workshops, dance workshops, neutral mask workshops. And there was sort of an incredible hunger for this work of physical theatre. I think people really loved the spontaneity of it and the physicalness of it and the joy. And so it was quite sort of, some people plan things and some people stumble on things. We hadn't really planned to come to Sydney at all, but I'd been teaching at the higher education in Perth, and one day they said to me, "Oh, sorry, we're cutting your classes because of budgetary reasons," even though I knew the classes were going really well and very popular. And I was just furious at having this sort of decision made about my livelihood. So I remember hopping on this bicycle and riding back to where we were living in Subiaco and storming into the kitchen and saying to Francis, "Well, that's it. We're going to set up our own school, okay? I'm sick of being beholden to other people." He said, "Oh, okay." Because we were sort of coming to the end of our time in Perth, and we were sort of thinking of going back to New Zealand.
Okay.
But there was this man, Paul McNeil, in Sydney, who sort of offered to help us if we did one, because people were asking us for longer term training. We rang him up and said, "Okay, we're coming to Sydney." So that was 1980. which was the first year of Drama Action Centre, and we were based in the Scout Hall in Greenwich. I mean, honestly, lordy, I mean, honestly, talk about sort of stumbling along, getting brochures together and advertising and developing a curriculum, and but suddenly we have all these students arriving from all over New Zealand and Australia to study. I mean, it was fabulous. And that year, I got a call from Phil Boas, who is based in Melbourne, BOAS, and he said, do you want to sponsor Jonathan Fox and his Playback Theatre group in Sydney?
And had you had any contact between the initial awareness of playback and that moment?
No. And Bill attended a couple of the workshops we were running in Melbourne, and so I knew him and he knew us. And it seems like I think I was doing all the administrative work at this stage. What's new? And I mean, obviously, I was consulting. We were consulting and talking about it. But I think we just sort of said, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea."
And
Yikes.
Was that another one of those spontaneous, well, let's see what happens, or was there something else or it was just another stumble?
Another stumble. Right. I mean, literally. I didn't have a clue what we were letting ourselves into. Absolutely not. Suddenly here we were sponsoring this group of Jonathan Joe and Judith Swallow and
Michael Clemente.
Coming to Sydney, and we were having to organise their schedule and their program there.
They came to Melbourne as well, obviously.
Yes, they came to Melbourne first.
Right.
And then they came through to Sydney, and I can't remember what they did in Melbourne. And I haven't a clue. Maybe Mary Good would know what's happened to Phil and find out.
Yeah.
So we sort of organised for them to run sessions and do a training as part of the curriculum for Drama Action Centre. And also, I think we did this. I think we organised a residential workshop up in Eleanor Heights. And then we organised this performance at the Nimrod Theatre, which was wild.
So just before we get there, you hadn't met Jonathan before he arrived in Sydney?
And nothing.
So do you have a memory of what it was like seeing or exploring playback for the first time?
I think I suppose we were sort of stumbling along as well as everybody else, but I don't think people realised how much we were stumbling along. And I think initially, it was just immediately sort of feeling, oh, this is interesting. Because we've both done our psychodrama training and we're sort of used to that format of a director extracting the sort of the story and the scene from the protagonist, then just seeing the transition that Jonathan had devised and making it more of a theatrical form. And I mean, a lot of the forms that he used, we were very familiar with, like sculptures. Our improvisation had used machines, how to build group interaction through building machines and things. We just were really open to it and very uncritical.
And the psychodrama connection seems like it was a strong one for you.
And also, like the theory about role theory and how to warm the audience up and how to pull out the themes. And so it was, I mean, I don't think we would have done it if we hadn't done the psychodrama connection. Totally not.
Because that was something that was core for you around the work in drama action as well.
Yes, because when we were in New Zealand and we realised that we were working so closely with people, we realised that with this work where you're working with people's spontaneity and creativity, you're working also very closely with people's psychological processes. And we realised we needed to understand more about that to feel effective in our work. And what we'd noticed in theatre groups was that quite often groups would fall apart because of lack of group process and knowing how to allow people to express their doubts and concerns, and we had no sort of tools for dealing with that. So Max and the training that we did in Perth with group process and learning about warm-up and how to allow people he'd talk about holding the group and creating the space and it was sort of like a language that we could see was also being used in playback theatre. And the difference pretty quickly that it established was that we were much more theatrically inclined than the American crew because they hadn't done the theatre training. It was not so familiar with the physicalisation.
Right.
Or not so explorative with the physicalisation.
So what was that meeting like?
I think, honestly, I think that we were so just stumbling along. You know how sometimes you're not able to articulate things until sort of quite a bit further on. I don't know whether this is accurate or not, but I think it took quite a long while for Jonathan and Joe to acknowledge the difference and sort of appreciate it.
And I think that's an ongoing conversation. And those first workshops must have been quite a discovery in a way.
Yeah. Sort of fun. And from there, we did this performance.
Yes. So you were in that performance?
Yeah.
What do you remember of that?
Oh, at the Belvoir Street?
Yes.
I remember sort of looking out at this huge audience, thinking, oh my God. And Brandon was in the audience,
right,
or 6 or 7 years old of him.
Yeah.
And so when that moment arrived where they invite audience members to come up and participate, he was up like a shot, sitting on the milk crate.
Who conducted that performance?
I think Jonathan did.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was Judith Swallow and the three of them.
Yes.
I think Joe might have been doing the music. Can't remember. I know Francis is in that performance as well. Does anybody else know who else?
I haven't checked that. In talking with Peter, he was at the performance, certainly, and he told a story.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. It was fairly. I mean, my memory was it was a fairly lightweight performance in terms of the stories people were telling.
He said it was a big crowd.
Oh, it was a huge crowd.
Yeah.
I mean, Nimrod, the theatre was full. So we had attracted a lot of theatre goers.
Yeah.
And also quite a lot of critique because I think that they hadn't experienced that sort of community theatre. Yeah. I can't remember how the critique manifested, but there was certainly a lot of opinions about it afterwards.
Do you remember any other connection with the feeling of that first show?
I mean, I think that this continued all along is because you're so on the spot constantly. Like it's not as though you very often think, phew, we did an excellent job.
Yes.
It's sort of like that. I mean, you're sort of living on the edge of your seat all the time because you haven't a clue what's going to be next. But I love that excitement of it.
And so what happened following that performance?
They went, we finished the training and a group of us decided to create a playback theatre troupe, and we started rehearsing once a week. I don't know whether now this is interesting, somebody might remember this. I can't remember whether we actually did many more public performances because I guess we must have, because the public performances I remember are the ones that we started Art of Drama Action Centre at the Rozelle grounds of the Rozelle Hospital. Right. And did you ever come to any of those?
I did, yes. Yeah. That's where I saw my first performance, yes.
Yeah. No, I do remember we performed in a church in Paddington a couple of times.
Yes, now that you say that, he mentioned that as well. Yes.
And Mary Good was part of the original troupe, and I think Mark Rogers was as well.
Peter recalled having a conversation, I think, just around, is it okay to set up a group? Do you have any sense around that? Or no, just the setting up of that? And okay.
I mean, obviously we would have had a conversation with them about it.
Yeah.
And they were very encouraging of it.
He also remembers auditions for that first company. Right. It's obviously stuck more for him because he was auditioning for the company rather than...
Gosh, I can't remember that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. I don't know how on earth we would have auditioned them.
Yes, he remembered it well and remembered names being read out at the end of auditions. And
wow.
Yeah. I guess, in that early stage, you were just discovering it as you went. Like,
totally.
Do you have any memories of those that early time in the company and what worked and what didn't, or what were the issues there?
I mean, I do think that we were really all conscious of just learning and discovering what worked and what didn't work, and also discovering a lot about audience warm-up, how to warm them up to telling stories and conducting. I mean, that's a very skilled aspect of playback, just learning the skills of the conductor. I mean, Lord knows, we must have been flying by the seat of our pants yet again.
There's a theme here.
There is. There's a theme of my life, most probably. I mean, we would have done that maybe, I can't remember, I think they were in Sydney for 2 weeks. Yeah, how much can you absorb in 2 weeks? And then we're on our own. But I think most probably because Francis had done the 2.5 years psychodrama training,
yes,
we had a lot of feel of what works and what doesn't work. And also we had the theatre training. I'm going to ring Mary Good and see what she remembers.
Does anything, either performance-wise or rehearsal-wise, stand out from that early period?
Just the fun of it, really. I mean, it's a great way to be together.
Yes.
Just the joy of learning together and the willingness to make mistakes and learn from making mistakes, and just that ongoing learning process, never feeling as if, we've mastered it now, we can sort of sit back, we're the Sydney Playback Theatre group. It's just like we're continually exploring and playing it by ear. And it was fabulous just seeing it evolve. And those Saturday nights, once a month, at Drama Action Centre.
At one point, I know when I was at Drama Action in 85, we did a term of playback theatre. Do you remember when that started as a core aspect of Drama Action?
I could look at the brochures.
Was it immediately after the?
Well, I think most probably. I doubt it.
No.
Because most probably it was more associated with when we developed the course into a 2-year course. But I'll check my files and have a look.
Okay. Did you have much contact with Jonathan and Joe and the New York company after the?
Well, you'd think that we'd have a lot of contact with you. It was pre some mobile phones, email, pre-everything really.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, because they came out, we sponsored quite a few of their trips back to Australia. We must have kept quite close contact with them. Yeah. It was sort of interesting seeing the gradual sort of evolution, like Mary Good going down to Melbourne once she finished the Drama Action Centre training and setting up the company there. And then in New Zealand, Martin and Marilyn Sutcliffe going back to Auckland and starting the Auckland Playback Theatre Group, and Bev Hosking going to Wellington. And in a sense, Drama Action Centre was the pivot point for a lot of, people going out through Australasia and setting up groups and companies. I hadn't really thought about that before.
How long were you in the company?
Quite a long time, and I can't remember when I dipped out. I remember being there quite a few years at Roselle, and maybe it was when I started running. Francis left. He was no longer partner with Drama Action Centre. Maybe I might have dipped out then because I sort of had enough on my plate.
Right. Playbacks remained a part of the Drama Action curriculum for. Yeah.
Lord knows who taught it.
Oh my goodness. You probably did.
Well, you're okay. I'm seeing all the holes in my memory.
No. Do you do any performances or things stand out for you from those early times?
Not really. It's interesting because if you ask me that question about the clown performances that I did with Francis, got quite a lot. Yeah, I think because it was very much a sort of group devised thing. If I was to ask that question of you, would you say that?
There's a couple of moments here that stand out for me. It was certainly for me challenging that in the rehearsal process, even that work around who are we as a company and how do we address the relationships we have through that, not so much directly psychodrama, but the focus on relationships was quite challenging in the company.
It's a sort of a delicate form, isn't it?
Yes.
Sort of creating that balance between the interpersonal and the professional.
Yes, and the importance of dealing with the emotions in the group if we're dealing with the emotions of an audience. Just on reflection, is there anything else you'd add about establishing Playback Theatre and your sense of where it's gone?
Jonathan and Joe set up a very generous model that enabled many people to set up their own groups, and it's been really successful in that way. Yeah, it's great, because if they'd been too possessive of it, or too expectations of that this was only one way, I think that wouldn't have spread the way it has. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly been a very effective model for going into communities and different sort of conferences and schools and things like that. I've always been a little bit disappointed that somehow didn't manage to tap into some public funding so that it could be full-time.
And do you have a sense of why that is?
I mean, I suppose part of it is just having someone who's willing to put in the hard yakka to get funding and to do the sort of necessary process of that.
Because story has
blossomed.
Yes. We have the moth, and we have lots of other vehicles for story, and yet Playback seems to have stayed in a small niche.
Yes, and I suppose it's because it's slightly more confronting than things like the moth. That would be my first sort of hunch.
Yes.
And to actually explain it is trickier, the effectiveness of it. But I would have thought by now that there's a sufficient body of material. I mean, quite a long time ago, there was a sufficient body of examples of how effective it is for some to get some money from some foundation, but not to be.
We're still waiting.
It would be fabulous if it did. Yeah.
Yes. And there are some individual organisations, I know Melbourne Playback has done some work around that. Sydney Playback has recently got some work over a longer, but it's that regular opportunity to work in the public sphere that we haven't been able to.
Yes, so I just guess it's around finding the right connection.
Yeah, so thank you.
Pleasure. Pleasure. It's fun talking about it.
That was an interview with Bridget Brandon, co-founder with Francis Batten of the Drama Action Centre and co-founder of Sydney Playback Theatre. You can hear the full interviews with others who were instrumental in the founding of Sydney Playback at its website, playbacktheatre.com.au. Click on the menu and then enter History in the search bar at the bottom of the page. Each of the interviews has more than I was able to include in the edited video version, and are worth a listen. Please email me at michael.pooley@iinet.net.au if you have memories, photos or stories to share about Sydney Playback Theatre at any stage of its 40-year history. We'd love to have those for our archive. Thanks for listening.